Welcome back to We Move Forward Together. I'm your host, Steve Yusko, and today we have a truly inspiring guest with us, Father James Merton. You might know Father Merton as the editor-at-large at America Magazine, or a frequent commentator on national media, or the New York Times bestselling author, and I believe of the beloved book called The Jesuit Guide to Almost Everything. But his path to the priesthood is absolutely fascinating. He graduated from the Wharton School of Business and spent 6 years successfully climbing the corporate ladder at General Electric before leaving it all behind to become a Jesuit priest. Today, he joins us to share his hilarious and profound stories of his brand new memoir, which I have right here, which I've read, called Work in Progress, reminding us that God meets us in the messy, everyday moments of our lives. Father Jim, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's an honor to be with you. Thanks for inviting me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I've been a fan. I've told you that for a long time. And just my first impressions of your book, it was so interesting to have the transparency to your background. You know, it's sometimes how a priest becomes a priest is a bit of a mystery. So tell me, what inspired you to write this memoir?
Yeah, that's a great question. My last two books were on the raising of Lazarus, a book called Come Forth that came out I think 2 years ago. And then before that, a book called Learning to Pray, a guide for everyone, which is about prayer. And both were pretty, I would say, serious, right? Obviously, the raising of Lazarus is joyful, but it's not exactly a laugh riot. The book was more about, kind of leaving things behind in the tomb, metaphorically speaking. And then the book on prayer, was, friendly and accessible, but it was a pretty serious topic. And so I started to write these stories of crazy summer jobs that I had: busboy, caddy, dishwasher, usher in the 1970s. And then, think about publishing it as a book. And my agent said, well, or my publisher said, you can't just publish a book of funny summer job stories. I said, well, why not? And she said, people will expect more from you. In fact, I was just speaking with her. And if you add the rest of your life, right, up until the time you and the Jesuits, so not only junior high school and high school jobs, jobs through college, and then the job at General Electric after graduation, and then entering the society, it could become a vocation story, which is what it eventually became. So it's a kind of unusual book for me. It's a little more lighthearted. It's a little more personal. But in a sense, it's a kind of vocation story in disguise.
What fascinated me about your approach were two things. One, the blatant honesty about a messy life, right? Mm-hmm. The knucklehead teenagers that we are, and forgiving ourselves through that mess. The second thing was, I'm a big lover of music, is how you tied lyrics throughout the book, which to me helped bring me back to that time, because we're close in age, and it's like, it was nostalgic, but it rang true. It was real to me.
Well, I'll tell you something funny. I'm not a big music expert. Let's put it that way. I'm sure, some people who just have, hundreds of albums growing up and all that. But I started to write this book, and, as I said, about half of it is about these crazy summer jobs. And as we know, there are certain songs that just are the background music for your summer jobs and for the summers. Yeah. And I thought it was, and they were an important part of the story. So pretty much each chapter has a song in it, a song, a lyric, or just a song that was kind of playing in the background on their transistor radio. And I wanted to include it. And then my publisher had the great idea of coming up with a playlist, which you can find on Spotify. If you go on the website under James Merton Work in Progress, it'll come right up. You can go on the website, and they came up with a playlist of all the songs that I mentioned in the book, which was tons of fun. Yeah, it's the background music to our lives. And so I thought it was important. And also some of the lyrics were really important to me. At one point, I quote the Supertramp song, the logical song, please tell me who I am. And, I'll tell you something. It wasn't until writing the book that I realized, gosh, these lyrics are pretty profound. And I was singing them probably in an unthinking way back then, but looking back, they were pretty profound. But I wanted to include it because it was part of my life.
Yeah, it's true, right? We have these different soundtracks, and some people have a lot of soundtracks. By the way, I just want to look to the audience. Hey, we love you to comment on things. We answer every comment out there, and tell me your favorite summer song in the comments. We'd like to know it, and please share and like this. It helps it go a long way to spreading the word of what we do here at We Move Forward Together. So there's one story in the book where you talk about, as a young man, walking through a meadow, and it was kind of a moment for you. So my question is, how do we start recognizing the divine in our own lives?
Well, for people who haven't read the book yet, it's about, I'm probably 9 or 10, I think, and I'm
Okay.
riding my bike across this kind of, I call it a meadow, but it was basically sort of an undeveloped plot of land on the way to my school. It was filled with weeds and wildflowers and all sorts of things. And I paused and looked around and just had this experience of wanting to really just stay there forever. It was so beautiful. It was a beautiful spring day. And to kind of possess it and to say, like, what is this feeling I'm feeling? And I looked back, and it was probably the first time that I felt a longing for God, but I wouldn't have put it that way back then. I was just sort of like, oh, you're daydreaming. But your question's a good one. What enables us to see those moments? I think, first of all, it's just noticing. And it is sort of being open to the possibility that really every moment is an opportunity to encounter God. But those sort of special moments, those sort of, I would say, mountaintop moments or quasi-mystical moments are, few and far between. Not every moment of my life is spent sort of in mystical union with God, and really few moments are spent in that way. But there are some times in our lives where we do have those experiences. And I think, again, the key is to be open to the fact that they may happen and really notice them. And that when they happen, take them seriously and don't just brush them off and say, oh, I was just being emotional,
Right.
Which is what a lot of people do. One of my favorite lines is from a Jesuit I knew who died early. His name was Father Bob Gilroy from the New England province of the Jesuits. And he used to say, I'm going to try this out on you. I just found this really helpful, that people regularly have experiences of God, and often profound ones, but they're not encouraged to talk about them. What do you think about that? Because I think that's part of it. Like, they're not told, like, hey, let's talk about this and what really happened,
We talk about a spiritual journey, right? I hearken back to when my parents would go on these trips and come back and do a slideshow, which was, horrible for us kids to watch them having fun.
I remember.
And I'll equate it to that is, hey, let me tell you about my spiritual journey. If you want somebody to move away from the plane seat next to you, just tell, come up with that phrase. But
I guess what I mean is, if people don't, like, if people are not encouraged to talk about them with the spiritual director, with someone who's religious, they forget them, and you really have to kind of encourage people to say, like, did this happen to you, and what happened? And let's talk about this, and to enable them to take it seriously, and even to give them the language. You know what I mean? I mean, you obviously don't want to, like, force it on somebody, but people have these moments, but they don't have the encouragement or the sort of invitation to say that really happened,
Yeah, to kind of guide us along the way, right? To stop, and smell the roses, and look at the traffic signs.
Yeah, because otherwise people just dismiss it. They just say, "Oh, that was some crazy moment of daydreaming." They don't connect it with God kind of calling out to you.
Right, and that kind of ties to contemplation, which I could never figure out early on in my life when you're in survival mode, right? When you're doing the mundane. It was time to contemplate. Maybe you do when you're washing dishes. I don't know.
Well, I mean, Therese of Lisieux used to say that's the little way, right? Is in fact when you're washing dishes, to kind of make it a, kind of a moment for God. Yeah, but I think you do have to take out that time. You do have to spend time sort of apart.
Right. So I got to read the jobs, because one job kind of one description jumped out of me, and it's confessions of a busboy, dishwasher, caddy, usher, factory worker, bank teller, and corporate tool and priest. The corporate tool jumped out at me.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Well, the corporate tool was an epithet back in the 80s. I graduated from the Wharton School of Business in 1982, and I accepted a job with GE, formerly great company, now sort of, all split up, and amazing to me that it's really gone. In any event, that was a sort of, I wouldn't say a slur exactly, but corporate tool meant two things. A tool, of course, at least when I was growing up, was a sort of a synonym for a jerk, basically. He's a real tool.
Right.
But also a tool, was like a cog, just sort of a part of the machine. And so we were called corporate tools. That was a double entendre. We were jerks, but we were also cogs in a machine. And that's kind of how I felt, towards the end of my business career. Business is a real vocation for a lot of people, and maybe for a lot of your listeners. It just is. It's a way of contributing to the common good and building up society and, our country and the economy. But it just wasn't for me. And it took me a while to figure that out, that I just was really in the wrong place.
And what was interesting, and I don't want to give away the whole book, but I strongly suggest everyone check this book out, is that moment. I think you were watching a documentary on Thomas Merton, or you read Seven Story Mountain. I wasn't sure which. That was kind of the turning point. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So so the book, Work in Progress, takes us through all these crazy summer jobs: busboy, dishwasher, caddy, usher, factory worker, whatnot. And then, you know, I enter college. I continue to work summer jobs. I worked in a factory and as an usher and as a bank teller. And then I finished my degree at Wharton in finance. We used to joke and say it's not finance, it's finance. You get more money if you say finance. And I had a professor who said, he had a Southern accent, I don't teach finance. You can go to some other school for that. We teach finance here at Wharton. So I got a job with GE, and as I said, eventually realized I was in the wrong place, but I couldn't figure out a way out. I thought, well, what am I going to do? I have a business degree and I studied and, spent a lot of money. I spent money. My parents spent money on college. And one night I came home and turned on the TV, and there was a documentary, which you can still find online, called Merton, a film biography by Paul Wilkes, on Thomas Merton. And it just captivated me. And I thought, who is this guy? Who is this? Right. What is this? And it's only about a half hour. It's very beautifully done. And it prompted me to go out, purchase, and actually read The Seven Story Mountain, and really start thinking about another way of life, which I knew very little about. I knew nothing about religious orders, truly. I mean, I knew there were monks. I imagine they were all monks, but I didn't know anything about the Jesuits or the Trappists, and that started me on this journey, which led to the Jesuits.
I knew of the orders, the different orders, Franciscans, Dominicans, what have you. Didn't know what the word, to me, it was a churchy word, charism. Right. And until my daughter went to Scranton, I got to meet some Jesuits. Go Royals. And just personally, it was a pleasure to hand her off to the Jesuits. And she did very well.
Well, that's great. It's a great school. Yeah, I think a lot of people, I would imagine many Catholics, don't know what a charism is. I didn't know what a religious order was. I'll tell you something funny, which I mentioned in the book. I went to my local parish. I was at this point in Stamford, Connecticut. And I saw that there were people who were kind of assisting priests on Sunday. I'm sure you people know this from their parish bulletins. It says, the pastor and then the staff. And then sometimes there'll be assisting priests from some school or something. And they had the initials OP, OFM, and SJ after them. I remember there was a Franciscan, a Dominican, and a Jesuit. And I assumed, and you're going to laugh, but I assumed that these were degrees. These were like academic degrees. And somehow, because, how do I know? If people went to a Jesuit something, they got SJ after their name, and that meant they were a Jesuit priest. And it wasn't until I talked to the Jesuits that I realized, they live in community. It's a religious order. They take vows. And so I was kind of clueless.
And yet here you are. So I got to ask you this on the different mundane, different jobs that you had. And by the way, in my family, you didn't take the summers off. You had to work, whether you're saving up or, it was just, that's the way life is. So what would you say out of all those different jobs, summer jobs, what was the one where you learned most about yourself?
I think my first real job outside the house. So the book begins with, I would say, my first real job, meaning I got a paycheck. And that was as a busboy dishwasher at a little restaurant called the Ice Cream Inn in a town that I grew up in called Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. Right. Before that, I'd worked as a paperboy and a lawnmower, which are, they're jobs, of course. I got paid more or less. And some funny stories about that. But this was the first one. My parents would call, this is your first real job. You went in, you had a boss, you had a little uniform of my kind of white smock. And I just learned a lot about what it meant to be unsure about how to do things, to work with people you didn't know, to show up on time. So a lot of the lessons that carried me throughout the book and that have carried me through life started there. Work hard, listen, apologize if you do something wrong, ask if you don't know how to do something, try your best to be kind to people, especially people who are kind of on the lower rungs of the job or the socioeconomic ladder. So I would say that one of the funny stories, the scholars call it an inclusio. At the beginning of the book, the manager of the ice cream inn teaches me how to use one of those industrial mops, with the side wringer, which I'd never seen before. We didn't use one of those in our house. Right. And I was so like, oh my gosh, what do you do? People know those mops on wheels and you have the squeezing thing. And he said, Yeah, put your whole body into it. When you squeeze it out, twist it, do this. And at the very end of the book, one of my first days of the novitiate, I'm asked to clean the kitchen floor. We all cleaned the house every Saturday.
Right.
And they rolled out one of these things, and I said, I know just how to use that. And it was kind of funny. So I learned how to do that kind of stuff as well, kind of simple physical labor too.
Yeah. So on the positive side, you learn how to treat people, to work side by side from people. And yet, and I want to go in a different direction. You also learn about people bully who are arrogant towards you. And you bring up some really good points in the book. And then I'd love to touch on some of the Ignatian practices, honestly, which really helped me as I work to converse with people and try to bridge the divide of debate. Right. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, when you're 15, 16, and you're a busboy and a dishwasher or a caddy or even a movie theater usher, people don't always treat you well. And I was treated well by my employers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of the time. But there were some stories that I told that I tell in the book about, being humiliated as a busboy and, really treated like dirt as a caddy, like really people not even using your name, just caddy, bring this, caddy, do that. And having one guy ask me to stand outside in a lightning storm with his bags under a tree. And I realized I was standing in a lightning storm, basically with a bag of lightning rods in my, 1 foot away from me. And, when I left him behind on the course, he got mad at me, and said, get back there and, stand by my bag. So the point of those stories is, some of them are funny. Some of them are kind of crazy and outlandish and a little nutty. But, one of the points of those stories is to show that I really learned a lot about humiliation. And it was as effective as a year's worth of homilies in terms of treating people with kindness. Wow. Meaning I would never, now I'm a kind person in general, but I'm always physically allergic when I see someone being mistreated, particularly someone who's in a service job or struggling. That again, I think the learning came not only from Jesus and from, wanting to treat people with dignity and love, but also from being mistreated myself. Was very effective in terms of a didactic tool.
Right. You speak of the aestheticism of kindness, and let me just do a preamble to this. And in watching you on national media, it doesn't seem like you get extremely upset. You must hide it very well, but your kindness comes through is what I'm trying to say. And
thanks.
In today's world, and you've been on the media the past week with Trump and the Pope, and God bless Pope Leo the 14th. So he's in the right place at the right time. And you've commented on that. But how do you well up the asceticism of kindness? How do you do it? Is what I'm asking.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think there's a very simple initial answer. First of all, when you're in the national media, you don't act like a jerk, and you don't let your tongue.
Great advice.
You don't let your tongue say what you might, initially feel in terms of your emotion. That's the first thing. So, I mean, I always know that, I'm not an official representative of the Vatican or of the Holy Father of the Jesuits. I'm not like some communications guy or whatever. I have a role in communications in the Vatican, but I'm not the spokesperson. That's what I'm trying to say. But I know that anytime you're a priest or a religious or a Catholic lay leader, you are more or less representing the church. Sure. And so you always want to give a good, sort of public face to that, which is a face of kindness and charity and listening and respect, of course, as you see the Holy Father doing that when he's asked questions about anything. So that's the first thing. But in terms of listening to people, I think it's first of all, giving people the benefit of the doubt, which is a real Jesuit practice, like really believing the best of people, even though what they say might, seem offensive to you, really saying this person's trying to come from a good point in their lives, good stance. Second, never using ad hominem. So I might say, Steve, I disagree with what you say, but I would say, Steve, you're a terrible Catholic. You're an awful person. You're going to hell, all that stuff. That just doesn't help. Third, I think being a really good listener and listening carefully to what they say, asking questions, and also finally being okay with the fact that not everybody's going to agree with you. I mean, that's key too.
Right.
So just the other day, Pope Leo made some comments about blessing same-sex couples, and I, sort of offered my own reflections on what he was saying, and people on both progressive and traditional side, disagreed in different ways. Not everybody's going to be on the same page, and I have to be okay with that. Right. Sure. And just to say, not everybody's going to be in agreement. And that also doesn't mean I have to attack people. So, in the end, and you can just sleep better at night. You can just sleep with you. You can look in the mirror and sleep better at night.
Yeah. So what you're basically talking about is that Ignatian presupposition,
Yeah,
correct?
that's correct.
Finding that grain of, okay, maybe this is why the attack is on. Maybe feel like they're protecting the church and they need to put you down or what have you. And, you're no stranger to being attacked by people within the church for, you're building the bridge out to the LGBTQ community, so it takes some great grace to look for the grain of truth in that.
Yeah, I think it's not only saying this is what they might be thinking, but this is who they are. They're individuals. They're trying their best to be good Christians or good Catholics, in our case. In terms of the attacks, just to remember that, I'm not comparing myself to him, that he is our model in all things, that this is what Jesus went through. And he said that if we're going to stand with people in the margins, we'll, get attacked. And also, look, the other thing is, like, a lot of the stuff that you hear, like, online, it's because a lot of these, like, they're fake accounts. So I'm not going to get too upset if a person with 0 followers and 1 post, who has obviously created this account just to oppose me, is going to oppose me. I just don't get too upset about that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. In looking at your book, I commend you for talking about the very personal stuff, how imperfect your life is. And I think that makes it relatable. It made it relatable to me, But then if we look at the audience and say, you have to embrace your imperfect past, expand upon that for me.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I want to say to readers, or people who haven't read the book yet, I didn't like murder anybody or rob a bank or, like extort millions of dollars. So, the things that I was talking about are pretty typical adolescent slip-ups, getting drunk, getting high, going out with friends, staying out too late, occasionally being selfish. But I think I wanted to be honest in that book because, well, first of all, it's true.
Right.
And I find that the most compelling books are memoirs, right? Where people share their kind of true stories. Second, some of them are pretty funny. And so when you screw up, some of the stories are kind of funny. I talk about messing up as a busboy and it leads to some humiliation and a lesson, but the story itself is pretty funny. But I also think it's important to see how God is at work even through these complicated, imperfect lives. And, one of the themes of the book, not stated explicitly, is that God could work through the life of a 15-year-old busboy in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania. God can work through your life too. And it's also a kind of invitation for people to do a kind of life examine themselves. This has been really interesting for me as I've talked about this book, and it is probably the most personal book I've read. So it's been an interesting time for me to talk about it because people say to me, there's a couple responses. One, it's really funny, really liked it. I love that story about the caddy or the busboy or the usher, Two, which you're sort of keyed in on early on, like, boy, I grew up in the 70s too, and I remember all that stuff. I remember these songs. I remember those foods you're talking about. I remember doing exactly what you did. But 3, people saying, boy, I've been looking over my life now too, not just my summer jobs, but my childhood, my youth, my adolescence, my young adulthood. And the book has given me permission to be able to look back at my imperfect life and see where God has been. And that's really been gratifying to me. I think I put this book out in the world to, share some life lessons and to share some funny stories. What I didn't realize is that it's been kind of an invitation to people to kind of look back on their own lives, which is really gratifying for me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned the Examen, which is a Ignatian practice. I think you do it twice a day, right?
Mm-hmm.
At noon and at night, where tell me if I'm wrong, but it's basically you look
That's
back
right.
on the day. What did I do well? What didn't I do well? What can I change?
Yeah, and where was God? Where was God in my day?
And where was
what
God?
What am I grateful for?
And in reading your book, I said, this is the Examen.
Yeah.
This is is it midlife Examen? I don't know, but it's Examen.
Well, at 65, if it's midlife, that means I'll be 130, by the time I'm done.
Hey, let me tell you, here at the Dominican Sisters of Amityville, I had the blessing of interviewing the oldest nun in the world.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, Sister Frances Dominici, born on Easter Sunday, just turned 113. And let me tell you, a woman of grit.
Well, I guess you have to be. Well, by the way, I'm just curious, did she give her sort of secret for long life?
So I didn't ask that question.
What do you think?
I interviewed her last year.
Uh-huh.
and it's everything is very Christ-centric, community.
Right.
And her, she lost at 2 years old. She lost her left hand in a train accident and tried to join two congregations that said, no, we don't take handicapped people.
Wow.
And that no turned into, I'm as capable as anybody else. And the Dominicans took her in, and
that's great.
God bless. She was a professor of mathematics at Malloy University till she was in her 83, 85.
That's great. It's a great story. I'm going to listen to that podcast. When you're talking about the examen, one of the things that helped me was, stumbling upon some journals that I found that I wrote when I was 15 years old. And so that in terms of looking back was kind of a real resource for me as well.
Yeah. So it's interesting. And I think I caught this in parts of the book, is doing research on yourself. This might sound crazy, is you had to reach out. First of all, this is not a James Martin tell-all book. And you were clear about that, about any romance or whatever. And good for you.
Well, I think the people I dated are still alive, so I doubt that they'd want me to do that stuff.
I think you went back to some of the places, right, to see what does it look like now?
Yes, my research. I joke about in the book my in-depth research. So what I did was, now I have a really good memory. That's not vain. I'm terrible in other things. Like I have a terrible memory for some things, like sequences. I'm really bad on. Like when did you start this and when did you finish this? But I'm really good on conversations, visual memory. I can picture the kitchen of the ice cream inn where I worked. I can picture the bank floor of the Western Savings Bank where I worked as a teller in downtown Philadelphia. I have the good recall for that, right? Some things I don't. But I was helped by immeasurably this journal I found, these two journals that I found when I kept when I was 15 years old, the two, hardcover composition books. Who does that when they're 15? It was the bicentennial. I think I wanted to record all what I would expect to be I expected to be the monumentally historic events of the bicentennial. And so incredible raw material. And it was a shock to meet yourself in an unmediated way. Like we all have ideas of what we were like at 15, 16, but there you are on the page talking about things that you totally forgot about. So that was fun. And then I also called people, all my friends, of course, to say, do I get this story right? I let them see the book and they were able to comment. Because I always think if you're going to talk about people, you should let them see what you're going to write. Sure. And then finally, I went back and visited some of these places where I worked, some were around, some were not around. And it was fun. I have to say, this is the most enjoyable time I've ever had writing a book. It was just because these stories are fun. It was fun to kind of recreate the 60s and 70s and 80s. And I just, I look back and with a lot of wistfulness and I hope the reader has as much fun reading the book.
If you look at it cynically, you could say, okay, is he looking back with rose-colored glasses and everything's nostalgic? Oh, it was messy, things went wrong, and what kind of blew me away, knowing where you are now, editor at large, America Magazine, a writer, a successful writer, New York Times bestsellers list, and there you are as a young man writing journals. And by the way, you ask, who does that anymore?
When is that? Is that recent or is that from 15 years old?
No, I do have poetry from when I was a young man.
Well, since we're doing this on video, can I show you the journal?
Oh, yeah. Oh, please. It'd be great.
Hold on.
All right.
So when my mother moved out of her house about 12, 13 years ago, the house we grew up in, and my mom spent 50 years there, and the house my sister and I grew up in, we went through all of our desk drawers, and I went to my desk drawer in my bedroom, and this was the desk that I used when I was 7 or 8 years old. And in many families, we never changed it. It's a tiny little desk. Right. And on the bottom of the right-hand side were these two books. And one of them, you might not be able to see it, but it says January 76. And it's very extensive. And, it's a lot. That's one day. And so it was a ton of sort of memories that I'd forgotten. And it was such a great resource and actually quite beautiful to be able to read it. You know what it was like, Steve? It was like meeting yourself at age 15.
Right.
Like really, because this is not sort of filtered. This is the way I was. And this is the stuff that I was interested in. This is how I wrote, and lots of exclamation points and underlines and, a lot of passion and emotion when you're 15 years old. Everything's a big deal. So it was fun. And that really helped sort of fill in some of the gaps in the book. And I quote from the journals. Because, some of it's silly, the stuff you think is important. But then some of it also was pretty touching, to look back on it. Was
at the age of 15 the first time you started journaling? And do you continue to journal today?
It was the first time. I think I'll read this to you if you don't. I don't think I've shared this with anybody.
This is great. Thank you.
Yeah. It's the first time, and I journal only now when I go on retreats. So
Hmm.
1976, bicentennial year, January 17th, 1976. I'm writing a journal so I'll know what happened when, and also to let my thoughts out. Like my sister says, you need a chimney, like let things out. This
Sure.
journal is my chimney, period, sort of. So I said, that's why I wrote it, to kind of like let my thoughts out. I think there was also a little grandiosity too. This is my journal. I'm 15 years old and very important. And but I'm glad I wrote it. And I think one of the more interesting experiences I had, I shared this in the book. At the end of the first chapter, when I'm working as a busboy and a dishwasher at the Ice Cream Inn, I had long remembered something that happened on my last night, August 27th. I have it in the book. I mean, how could I ever remember that? Like it was August 27th.
Right.
Which was that I was thrown into a dumpster by some of the older boys. And I say in the book that for the longest time, as an adult, I remembered that. I remembered the physical sensation of being thrown into a dumpster. But I remember it as a kind of humiliation, as an embarrassment. And when I read my journal, it was just the opposite. It was funny. And it was something that happened to everybody. And I wonder if I can find it right now. Let's see if I can find it. And it was kind of a here it is. I'll read it in my own handwriting.
Please.
And I'll show if anyone's watching the video, this is it. My last night of work was Friday the 27th. On everyone's last night, they got it. Well, I did too. 21 buckets of water on me, and I was thrown into the dumpster. I knew it all night, and at the end, we all just laughed about it. I'm glad I worked this summer. I made over $300. That's pretty good, I think. I'll probably return next year if I can find a better job. And then the next sentence is, I got my hair styled in a new way. So, which is something I don't have to worry about anymore. But so the point is that it was also kind of a reflection on how our memories can sometimes be changed, and not exactly accurate. And stuff that we thought was horrible might not have been so bad. And stuff that we thought was great might have not been so great. And so I thought that was really kind of fascinating for me. So I put that in the book. And that's why I was glad I had these journals, because it made it more accurate.
It's amazing. At that time, when I was in high school, I went to seminary in Princeton, New Jersey with the Vincentians, and everybody went through initiation, and it was small stuff. It wasn't really anything horrible. I won't go into detail, but it was like, everybody goes through this.
Yeah.
And now you're part of a community.
Yeah. And you probably would have been disappointed if you hadn't gone through it. Huh?
Yeah. Hey, did you forget about me?
Right. I remember vividly, though, the experience of being tossed, 1, 2, 3, and then they threw in this dumpster. I was this little skinny kid, and I like sailed over the edge of the dumpster. I said it was like being a high jumper, going over the bar and into this sort of not uncomfortable, pack of like trash bags and all sorts of ice cream tubs and stuff like that. So yeah, but again, just the kind of mystery of memory too is one of the themes of the book.
Yeah. Hey, I want to talk to you about something, just to circle back to the Dominican Sisters of Amityville.
Yeah, who I love.
In reading your book, and I'm going to relate their origin story, there's parallels that I see that may be helpful to people. And by the way, anyone who's watching, please comment. And if you feel a connection here, we want to connect with one of the sisters, you need a spiritual director, you want to become an associate, you see what we do here and say, hey, I want you to help guide me on my spiritual journey or any journey that I'm on, please comment. But the quick story of the origin story of the Dominican Sisters back in 1859, 4 German nuns came to Brooklyn, Manhattan. They were supposed to be met by a priest, and they were supposed to end up in Pennsylvania, where you're from, to support the German immigrants there and give them schooling and that sort of thing. But things got really messy, and they say there were logistical problems. He didn't show up. So where do they end up? They end up living in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, in the basement of a rectory, which I'm sure was not the nicest place, no offense to rectories, and eventually came out. And so what did I surmise from that? And I won't talk too long, is that, okay, they had this plan. The plan changed, right? They're definitely guided by God, in my opinion. But what did they experience in that messiness? They were immigrants who came to a new country, probably didn't speak the language very well, really had to depend on other people to move forward. And they built this foundation and had an experience of social justice, community spirituality, and they built a farm out here on Long Island. The farmer gave a farm over, and they've grown from that point. And similar, I look at your story. I look at my story, heading towards corporate America. You've got you got the world in your hands. You're making some money, but it wasn't fulfilling and it wasn't meant to be. And here you are today, affecting so many lives. Anyway.
Yeah, no, it's, it reminds me of Ignatius' story, the founder of the Jesuits. We sometimes call him the patron saint of Plan B.
Okay.
Because Plan A didn't work out. Originally he wanted to be a pilgrim in the Holy Land for the whole, just forever, and just stay there and beg and do this. And eventually the Franciscans, who had the run of the place and still do all the holy sites, kicked him out, said, go back home. And so Plan B. And Plan B was, he ends up, founding a religious order, the Society of Jesus. But I think it's true. God writes straight with crooked lines, as the old proverb goes. That's one of the themes of this book. And the other, as I said before, the invitation is for all of us to see how God is at work in our lives and how God writes straight with crooked lines, and how sometimes Plan B turns out to be what, should have been Plan A.
Right. And that's okay. Right.
It is okay. It's more than okay. Yeah. Because you learn stuff too.
Yeah. So we get humbled in menial jobs sometimes as a young person to learn how to be humble. Right.
Yeah. And if stuff had, gone the other way, the Amityville Dominicans might have been the Plymouth Meeting Dominicans, but they're in the right place. Thank God.
Right. Exactly. So we're going to put links in the description. One, I'm definitely going to put the Spotify playlist in the description, as well as links to how people can get your book, Father, and all your books. And I've read several. And I'm getting back into reading finally.
Great.
But I want to thank you so much for your time, to being, you can count for what you have in the bank and what you own. You can't account for the time you have left. And the fact that you've given me this time and given us, the audience, this time is really a blessing. And I thank you for that.
Well, my pleasure. And I'm also a big fan of the Amityville Sisters and all the wonderful work that they've done. And it's an honor to be on the show. And I just thank you for allowing me to talk about my book. So thanks so much, and God bless you.
God bless you too, Father. Thank you.